I ended his career while I still wanted to hear him say my name. It's strange the things you can want and destroy in the same breath. It's 2:04 a.m. in Manhattan. The city's glass towers are lit in quiet grids, their reflections stretching across black rain on the streets below. I'm in my study lights low so I can see the skyline without catching my own face in the window. A muted newsfeed runs on the wall screen. The anchor is talking about a possible leadership shakeup in global finance. They don't know yet that I'm holding the match. A small flash drive sits dead center on my desk. I've moved it 3 times tonight like it's a piece in a game I haven't finished mapping. To most people, it's a device. To me, it's insurance. My name is Victoria Lancaster, though in boardrooms they call me V. I manage more capital in a year than some countries move in a decade. In my world, information is currency, leverage is oxygen, and trust is a luxury I learned to live without after one lesson too many. Ethan Cole used to be the exception. My husband, my partner, the one man I believed was proud to stand next to me instead of in front. He's the kind of man who can light up a room without raising his voice, ambitious, brilliant, dangerously charming. A perfect front for the rot underneath. And then there's Serena Marquez. She sits in my office 3 floors down, shaping public narratives for the firm. All gloss camera angles and quick instincts. She can turn a rumor into a headline before lunch. She can also turn a man who isn't hers into a weapon. They didn't just sleep together. That's almost the least of it. They planned to take my company, burn my name, and make sure no one would ever trust me with $1 again. A hostile takeover dressed as a corporate rebrand. Every step designed to push me out so Ethan could take the CEO title and Serena could crown herself queenmaker. The betrayal isn't in the fact that they plotted. It's in how precise they were. They used my own systems, my own networks, my own penthouse to map it. I know this because I intercepted an email meant for the rival investment firm funding them. The subject line read, "Final Transition Strategy." The body outlined exactly how to transfer my offshore accounts without alerting compliance. Attached was a video recorded in my living room of Ethan and Serena discussing my removal. So now I sit here in the dark, in the one room they haven't touched. The rain outside has shifted to a faint, icy mist. My watch ticks loud enough to hear. Somewhere in this apartment, a second phone waits in a locked drawer. That number is known to exactly one other person in the world. Before dawn, it will ring. When it does, everything I've been waiting to do will start. And I will not stop until they both wish they had never met me. Mornings are a controlled ritual for me. Black coffee in a porcelain cup. 10 minutes of stretches on the mat in my bedroom. One line in my private journal app always written before sunrise, always in code only I understand. Those first moments decide the tone for the day. They're the one part of my life I don't let anyone else touch. Control is not about micromanaging, it's about deciding which battles you even allow to exist. I learned that as a whistleblower years ago in a smaller firm when speaking up cost me my job, my circle of so-called friends, and nearly my sanity. Since then, I've built walls tall, invisible, and quiet. I'm a financial strategist by trade, but in truth, I manage people. Their ambitions, their fears, their blind spots. That's where the real leverage lives. My strength is pattern recognition, seeing the shape of a move before anyone admits they're making it. My flaw, I test people without warning, just to see what breaks. There's only one person I trust without hesitation, Maya Chen, my chief legal counsel. She's rule-bound to the core, pragmatic to a fault, and the one person who's called me out when I've crossed a line. She's not a friend in the traditional sense. She's an anchor. I don't need many of those. In the opposite corner of my world is Roland Pierce, our board chair. He enjoys watching people fight for power like it's a private sport. I've learned to respect him, but never to underestimate him. He's the kind who'd smile while setting fire to the room just to see who runs first. And then there's the potential shadow player. I don't have a name yet, just a profile. 2 years ago, an investor group tried to take this firm and lost by a single vote. The way Serena and Ethan move reminds me of that loss, quick, decisive, overconfident. Either they've learned from that defeat or they've partnered with someone who has. Serena Marquez, her official title is Senior Vice President of Public Relations. In reality, she's a media tactician who treats public opinion like clay in her hands. She knows which reporters drink too much at events, which rival execs have affairs they can't afford to see exposed, and which words will sink stock prices. I've seen her turn a damaging rumor into an industry trend piece within hours. It's a skill that would impress me if she weren't aiming it at me. Ethan. I used to think I understood him. He came from the tech startup world, lean teams, fast pivots charm as currency. He was the man who could write code in the morning pitch to investors over lunch and close a deal over drinks by night. But Ethan's hunger isn't for achievement, it's for recognition. He wants the applause more than the accomplishment. I used to feed that hunger. Now I see how easily it can be weaponized. 2 weeks ago during a routine fire drill, I noticed something. Serena and Ethan left the building not through the main stairwell, but through the vendor access door at the rear. That door bypasses security cameras for exactly 30 seconds. I noted the time 11:46 a.m. I didn't mention it to anyone. Later that afternoon, a janitor approached me in the lobby as if by accident. He leaned close and said, "They asked for the door schedule. No context, no explanation." He walked away before I could respond. The next day, his name was gone from the contractor roster. I kept his note scribbled on the back of a service invoice folded in the smallest pocket of my wallet. It's still there now, a reminder that even small moves are signals if you know how to read them. My office sits on the top floor of the tower, a space lined with glass-polished steel and silence thick enough to hear the faint hum of the air system. People say the view must be intoxicating. It isn't. It's a constant reminder of the drop beneath you. One wrong step and it's a long way down. That's the thing people don't understand about power. It's not about having it, it's about keeping it day after day, while everyone around you is looking for a crack. The first crack I noticed wasn't in the numbers. It was in their timing meetings that ended just before I arrived, elevator rides where voices stopped when I stepped in, and small glances exchanged over the rims of champagne flutes at corporate events. The kind of signs that most people would dismiss. I don't dismiss anything. And now the signs are all pointing in the same direction. Toward me. Away from control. I've been here before. The difference is last time I played defense. This time I'm holding every receipt, every timestamp, every name. And when I move, it will be with precision. The skyline outside my window blurs in the drizzle lights smearing into streaks. In my reflection, I see the smallest shift in my own eyes. That's how I know this isn't just about stopping them. It's about ending them in a way they never see coming. And they don't even know I've already started. It started with a number I didn't recognize on a corporate expense log. A dinner at Le Jardin, a restaurant where a table for two costs more than most people's monthly rent. The receipt was coded under a vendor account I'd never approved. I didn't confront anyone. Not yet. I traced the payment. It was routed through a Shell reimbursement fund buried inside our marketing budget and accounts Serena controlled. The next breadcrumb was a car service invoice. Same night as the Le Jardin dinner. Pickup from Serena's apartment. Drop off at the Whitmore Hotel. The Whitmore is where you go if you want luxury without paper trails, unless someone like me knows exactly where to look. I called in a quiet favor with the night manager, an old acquaintance who owed me twice over. Within an hour, I had copies of check-in records for that night. 2 rooms booked minutes apart, paid in cash by the same driver who appeared on the invoice. But it wasn't until I got into Serena's cloud share that I saw the real plan. She'd left a folder mislabeled Q3 Crisis Drafts. Inside were polished press releases complete with pre-written headlines, Lancaster accused of insider trading. Global investors react Lancaster's secret office affair, rocks firm. The so-called affair was illustrated with photos, doctored images of me and one of our junior analysts, a young man barely out of grad school. Whoever edited them had done a clean job. To the casual eye, they were real. At the bottom of the folder was a memo marked confidential, legal. It contained forged documents that, if filed, would move my family foundation's trust into a temporary management account, effectively locking me out. It was signed with a perfect imitation of my signature. And then there was the email. I found it in Ethan's personal archive, hidden in a subfolder labeled Archived Tech Notes. It was short, blunt, and surgical. Once this is done, she loses everything: career, money, custody of what she loves most. I read that line 3 times. They didn't mean a child, I don't have one. So what did custody mean? My company? My own name? Something worse. That's when I realized this wasn't just an affair. It was a removal. I checked Serena's phone records. She'd made the rookie mistake of syncing her calls to her work account. That's where I found the clock. A calendar event named Clean Exit, set for exactly 14 days from now. The location field was empty. The description read, "Announce new CEO on CNBC." I saved every screenshot, every file, every receipt. I didn't rush. I wanted the picture to be complete before I made my first move. Later that night, in the silence of my penthouse, I opened the footage. It came from one of my own security cameras, the one in my living room. Ethan and Serena were standing by the floor-to-ceiling window city lights, framing them like a scene from a film. Their voices were low but clear. They were discussing the exact sequence to transfer my offshore accounts, complete with the step-by-step timing to avoid detection. At one point, Serena gestured toward my bedroom door. The casual familiarity in that motion made my skin tighten. I paused the video. I don't remember breathing for a full 30 seconds. They had been in my home, not as guests, not as family, as thieves mapping the place where I sleep. The rain outside picked up ticking against the glass. Somewhere down in the street, a siren wailed and then faded. On my desk, the flash drive sat next to a clean, unused phone. 14 days. That was the window. And I wasn't going to waste a single one. Their motive was never just lust. Lust fades. Power doesn't. Ethan wanted the title. Serena wanted to be the hand that placed the crown. Together, they found the perfect deal, an offer from a rival investment firm that had been circling my company for years. The terms were simple: force me out, destroy my credibility, and the firm would install Ethan as CEO and Serena as head of global communications. They weren't improvising. They'd built a blueprint. Step 1, public corrosion. Leak falsified records of insider trading under my name. Make the allegations loud enough, detailed enough that even the board would have to distance themselves from me. Step 2, personal implosion. Stage a scandal with the junior analyst, complete with fabricated affair photos and whispers about coercion. The goal wasn't just to humiliate me, it was to make me radioactive in the industry. No one invests with a liability. Step 3, legal isolation. Submit forged documentation that would trigger an emergency review of my capacity to manage client money. Freeze my accounts. Force me to step down voluntarily to focus on clearing my name. Step 4, the accident. They had a contingency, a staged security breach during a high-profile event that would end my public role for good. I didn't know the details yet, but I knew enough to recognize the threat. From the outside, I played the part of the unsuspecting executive. I smiled in meetings, asked about Serena's latest PR campaigns, even let Ethan pitch me a joint vision for our future. I laughed at the right places. I signed documents, harmless ones, without hesitation. Behind that mask, I was building my own board, not of people, but of proof. Every file, every voice recording, every financial breadcrumb was secured on a clean device stored offline. I knew better than to confront them now. In their minds, they were winning. That's what made them sloppy. The crack came when I traced the funding for their operation. The rival firm bankrolling them wasn't as untouchable as it pretended to be. They'd overextended too many acquisitions, too little liquidity. With the right shell company, I could start buying their debt quietly, piece by piece. That became my move. My acquisition wouldn't just hurt them, it would pull the ground out from under them entirely. I set up a holding entity through an offshore trust one with no visible link to me. From there, I began the first purchase order for a controlling debt position in their portfolio. I used a name that wouldn't trace back until I wanted it to. Every night after the city quieted, I sat in the dark of my study mapping their plan against mine. Each arrow they'd drawn to point at me, I redirected back at them. They thought they were removing me from the boardroom. What they didn't know was that I'd already reserved the seat they'd be fighting for at a table I would own outright. The signature on that purchase order was the first real move in the game, and I made it with a steady hand. The countdown hit 7 days. That's when the silence between us became a weapon. Every interaction with Ethan and Serena turned into a duel without rules. They spoke in polished sentences, but their eyes kept flicking, searching for cracks, testing for weakness. I gave them nothing but polite nods and the occasional question that seemed casual but wasn't. One afternoon, I left a folder open on my desk. Inside were meaningless spreadsheets, random figures, no pattern at all. By the next morning, I heard a rumor circulating in the office about V's secret restructuring plan. The only way that could have started was if someone had peeked at that folder and carried the story to Serena. I made a note, they're still biting at bait. Then Serena made her own mistake. She accidentally copied me on an internal email. The attachment was a press plan titled "Board Shake-Up Lancaster Steps Down." I replied with a single line, "Looks interesting." She didn't answer. But something else started showing up, a name, N. Kestrel. It appeared in forwarded messages, financial transactions, even private notes between Ethan and Serena. N. Kestrel never attended meetings, never showed on call logs, but somehow set deadlines and authorized payments. The more I dug, the more I realized they treated this person's word as final. I couldn't tell if N. Kestrel was the rival firm's operative or someone inside my own company. The pressure began to change texture. This wasn't just corporate betrayal, it was starting to feel personal. 3 nights in a row, my secure line rang with no one on the other end. Just a faint hum like a server room. The calls came at exactly 2:11 a.m. The timing wasn't random. And then came the sound in my own apartment. I was working in the study when I heard a slow, deliberate scrape against the doorframe, too light to be a knock, too intentional to be the building settling. I checked my security feed. The hallway camera showed a blur at the edge of the frame, but the motion sensor didn't trigger. Later, I noticed something even stranger. Standing by the window, I caught my own reflection in the glass, but it was a beat too slow, like an old video feed lagging behind reality. I didn't flinch. I just wrote down the time in my notebook and kept working. By the 6th day, the anonymous interference escalated. I received a message on my clean device, one I'd only ever used to store my private counterstrike plans. The sender name, N. Kestrel. The message contained only 2 words, "Time flies." I typed a reply, my fingers hovering over the keys. Does it, but I didn't send it. Because whoever N. Kestrel was, they already knew more than they should. And I wasn't ready to show them just how much I knew in return. The London air was sharp that morning, the kind that wakes you up even when you've barely slept. The Global Finance Summit was being held in the glass atrium of the Clarion Center, a cathedral to money and ego, with its ceilings high enough to make you feel small and its lights angled to make you look perfect on camera. Ethan and I were seated on the same panel truss in the modern market. Serena was working the press line greeting reporters like she owned the place. Roland Pierce, our board chair, sat in the front row with that half smile he reserves for moments when he expects blood. I knew exactly what was coming. Their plan was to trigger the hit here live in front of a global audience. It started with the planted question. A journalist in the middle row holding a mic like it was a weapon. "Ms. Lancaster, there's chatter about irregularities in your trading activity. Some are calling it insider trading. Care to comment?" The room went still for half a breath. Serena leaned toward a small cluster of reporters, sliding them embargoed press kits. Ethan gave a perfect imitation of shockbrow, furrowing just enough to suggest concern without commitment. I didn't look at him. I didn't look at Serena. I looked at the camera. "I do have a comment," I said. My voice was even, and I brought receipts. Behind me, the main screen lit up not with their prepared statement, but with mine. The first frame froze Ethan and Serena in my penthouse living room, talking about how to move my offshore accounts. Subtitles ran beneath their voices, crisp and undeniable. A murmur ran through the crowd. The second frame was a calendar screenshot from Serena's phone. "Clean exit, announced new CEO" on CNBC. 14 days. The third frame was the punch transaction records linking Serena to undisclosed payments from the rival firm. Another set linking Ethan to the forged documents meant to lock me out of my foundation's trust. Gasps, the clatter of dropped pens, the buzz of phones being lifted. Ethan turned toward me, lips parting like he might say something. I didn't give him the space. "I don't gamble with other people's money," I told the audience. "I invest in facts." And these are facts. That was the moment the dam broke. Reporters surged forward. Camera flashes lit the air. Serena was already trying to move toward an exit, but security blocked her path. Ethan stayed frozen for a second too long, then followed her head down. The board chair didn't say a word. He just sat back, folded his hands, and watched them leave. As the panel dissolved into chaos, my gaze shifted to the far back of the hall. A figure in a red coat was standing near a support pillar watching me. The second I made eye contact, they stepped behind the column. When I looked again, the space was empty. I kept my expression neutral. The cameras were still rolling, and I wasn't about to let anyone see I'd just spotted a ghost in the room. Exposing them was never the endgame. It was the opening move. The morning after London headlines buried Ethan and Serena alive. By noon, the rival firm's stock had slipped 6%, and their comms department was in no comment mode. But chaos alone doesn't guarantee survival, not in my world. I needed to make sure neither of them could recover. First, the corporate kill shot. Through the shell company I'd been building, I finalized the acquisition of the rival firm's debt. Once I controlled their debt covenants, I forced a disclosure review. That review uncovered Serena's undisclosed payments from the firm, a breach of her ironclad NDA. She was terminated within 48 hours pending multiple lawsuits. Ethan was easier. I compiled a packet of evidence proof of his involvement in the forged documents transaction logs, tying him to Serena's slush accounts and emails where he outlined their plan. I didn't send it to law enforcement. I sent it to the 3 investors whose trust he valued most. One withdrew funding on the spot. The other 2 ghosted him entirely. Deals dried up like spilled water on hot pavement. But I didn't stop there. I filed a formal report to the IRS about Ethan's hidden crypto wallets, carefully worded with enough credible data to spark an audit. Whether they found anything or not, the stigma alone would follow him. Then came the personal layer. This was the part they would feel. An anonymous package arrived at Serena's temporary apartment. Inside the red dress she'd worn to her first private dinner with Ethan. Dry cleaned. No note, just the garment. Ethan's turn came a week later. His phone lit up with a text from an untraceable number. A single line word for word what he'd said in my living room on that video. We can move it quietly if she's out of the country. Time-stamped. 2 nights after that, they both reported sightings to mutual acquaintances. A figure, tall, silent, standing across the street from their buildings at different times. Always looking up, never approaching. Disappearing when they checked again. I didn't need to be the figure. The idea of it was enough. The beauty of psychological pressure is that it compounds in isolation. They couldn't go to the police without admitting to everything else. They couldn't tell friends without sounding paranoid. And they couldn't turn to each other not when trust between them was now a liability. Meanwhile, I stayed in plain sight. Board meetings, investor calls, charity dinners, smiling for cameras, answering questions about leadership under pressure. I even took a weekend in the Hamptons posting the kind of casual photos people mistake for peace. But at night, in the stillness of my penthouse, I felt the shift. They weren't the only ones being watched. It started small, a shadow in the corner of a security feed too quick to pin down. Then the emails. No threats, no demands, just snapshots of Serena and Ethan taken from angles I'd never had access to. Hotel lobbies, parking garages, coffee shops. The sender was always the same Lancaster. The most recent one showed them sitting in separate rooms, each with their own lawyer. The caption, almost done. I stared at that message for a long time. Whoever Lancaster was, they weren't helping me out of loyalty. They had their own agenda, and they had access I didn't. One question kept me awake long after the city went quiet. If Lancaster could follow them this closely, how closely were they following me? I started running scenarios in my head. If they'd been in my system once, they could be again. If they'd been in my building, they could have been in my home. The scrape at my study door, the lagging reflection, none of it felt random anymore. Control had always been my edge. Now, for the first time, I wasn't sure I still had it. Still, the plan was working. Ethan and Serena were burning through what little social capital they had left. Rumors about their fallout started to surface, Serena blaming Ethan for botching the London event, Ethan accusing her of leaking the penthouse video. I just kept moving the pieces, careful never to push too hard. It's not enough to win in this game. You have to make them believe they lost all on their own. By the 3rd week, they were finished. Serena was out of the industry. Every major finance PR agency had quietly blacklisted her. The lawsuits were just getting started, but her real punishment was knowing she'd never hold a microphone at another investor conference again. Ethan's downfall was even quieter. No headlines, no public scenes, just doors closing one after another. Investors stopped returning his calls. His name disappeared from startup advisory boards. The audit notice from the IRS became the final nail. Even those still willing to take his meetings began to treat him like a contagion. The two of them no longer appeared together in public. When they did speak, it was through lawyers, each blaming the other for the collapse. The alliance that had been so carefully constructed cracked into pieces just like I'd intended. And then something shifted. One rainy Tuesday evening, Serena's street was cordoned off. A transformer had blown near her building, plunging half the block into darkness. No one was hurt, but a witness claimed they saw someone standing under the streetlight just before it exploded, a shadow that vanished in the flash. Later that night, back in my office, I found it. A single red stiletto heel placed neatly in the center of my chair. Serena's signature shoe. There was a folded note tucked inside. The handwriting was hers. "You took my career. I will take your life." I turned the shoe over in my hand, noticing a faint scratch along the sole, an almost perfect match to the edge of my study's hardwood floor, which meant, at some point she'd been here, inside my home. And I hadn't known. Victory felt nothing like I thought it would. I had the company. The board was silent, the markets calmed, my name was still on the building. But the silence at night had changed. I replaced my entire personal staff, cycled through 3 new security firms, rotated drivers, and installed biometric locks. Still, sleep came in short, shallow bursts. I found myself checking the hallway cameras at odd hours, not for Ethan, not for Serena, but for something else. Something I couldn't quite name. The package arrived on a Monday, no return address, heavy for its size. Inside was a small encrypted drive. I loaded it on my clean system, the one without any network connections. The files were surgical time-stamped logs, financial trails, message archives. They didn't just detail Serena and Ethan's plot, they proved something else. Someone else had set it all in motion. The logs showed the very first anonymous tip about my supposed insider trading hadn't come from them at all. It had been sent to Serena from an outside source, in Kestrel, months before I'd seen the first sign of betrayal. One folder hit harder than the rest, surveillance photos. Not just of them, of me. Boardroom shots, walking into my building, standing at my own window. The earliest was from 2 years ago, long before any of this began. The last photo was taken from inside my penthouse study. It showed me sitting at this very desk, looking at the skyline. Timestamp 3 weeks ago. I scrolled further. There was one final document, a meeting record. Roland Pierce, our board chair, sitting with members of the same investor group that lost their takeover bid 2 years ago. In the transcript, he asked them for a scenario that would remove Ethan cleanly, but leave V softened. I leaned back, the drive still in my hand. This wasn't over. It might never be over. That night, as I worked in the study, I heard it again, the slow, deliberate footstep in the corridor outside. Then, a single light knock on the door frame. I didn't move. From the locked drawer beneath my desk, the second phone began to ring. One long tone, the sound stretching into the quiet like it belonged there. I answered. "I am here," I said. A voice I didn't recognize replied, calm and certain. "Welcome back to the game." The line went dead. In the glass before me, my reflection lagged a full second behind. Fade to black.